Hey there, ding-dongs. You no doubt did a double take when you saw this episode pop up. Not necessarily because of the topic at hand, but because of the quote-unquote short hiatus I promised back in December ended up being a wee bit longer than expected. Well, the wait is over. I'm back, y'all. But I'm going to get into the reasons behind my long absence with a short episode that will hopefully serve as both an informative exploration and a personal update that will explain how the fact that this podcast came to exist at all at the time it did is something of a miracle. I want to begin with a quote by one James Dalton, a bouncer played by the universally beloved Patrick Swayze in the 1989 movie Roadhouse. Pain don't hurt. It's a hell of a tough guy line, right? But I'm willing to guess most of you listening to this can identify with it. If we hurt ourselves, maybe stub a toe, skin a knee, or cut ourselves, we tend to deploy the wisdom of our elders, rub some dirt on it, as my own dad has been known to say, and get back to work. Speaking of my dad, both of my parents actually, they always treated their pain as something almost trivial. They might throw out their back or have some other kind of ache or illness, but ultimately they'd add it to their list of daily burdens and keep pushing forward. They worked hard for our bread in jobs where paid time off and sometimes even health insurance was a luxury we couldn't afford. And that went double for emotional pain. Stress, depression, fatigue, and general life drag got you down. You work through that shit. Get over yourself. Life isn't gonna stop just because you're having a case of the sads. Keep your nose to the grindstone and, well, grind. Mind you, this isn't the advice they gave my brother and me. They told us to rest, to take care of ourselves. We were allowed to stay home from school when we weren't feeling well. But that was different from what we saw them doing for, or rather to, themselves, and it made a deeper impression. My brother and I tended to do more what our parents did rather than what they said. And as a result, we're both sort of dealing with our own sense of workaholism. Again, I'm betting a lot of you listening to this right now are finding yourselves nodding and understanding. But I'm not blaming my parents. This is the culture they were raised in, that millions upon millions of us have been soaked in since our conception. Pain don't hurt. It can't hurt because we have money to make, kids to raise, bills to pay, goals to attain. We have to survive, and that can't happen if we give in to the agony. We think of our ancestors and everything they fought and suffered through, the Great Depression, countless wars, the draft, other diseases and disasters, and we tell ourselves that despite our plate overflowing with strife, we still have it better than they did, so we have no excuse but to suck it up. And most of our jobs reinforce this too. Again, paid time off still isn't much of a thing in many industries, particularly in the manufacturing and service sectors. And that hasn't changed nearly as much as it should in these pandemic times. People are still turning up to work sick. If they miss a day of pay, they can't keep the lights on or pay for their kids' school clothes. And speaking of kids, have you seen the cost of daycare lately? Forget about it. You might feel awful, but imagine how much worse you'll feel when you're evicted or have your car repossessed. Pain don't hurt. Pain don't hurt until it does. I'm going to differentiate between two different kinds of pain here. There's the acute variety, which is the result of a sudden singular event, like the aforementioned stubbed toe or waking up with a crick in your neck. A force acts upon the body, lighting upon something called nociceptors, those are your pain receptors, which send a signal to the brain telling it to flash the ouchie lights. But then there's chronic pain, which can be born from an acute event, but not always. We don't always know the cause, in fact, but it hangs around well past its welcome. Days become weeks, become months, become years. At some point, often without you even realizing it, the pain becomes enough of a part of your identity that you can't remember the last time everything didn't hurt. And then you find yourself having conversations where you mention how your body hurts every single day and you take it for granted the other person can relate, only they can't. And you're left holding your own reality like a purse that clashes badly with your outfit. This is different from post-workout aches or those annoying twinges we all get as we age, the kind where after you're up for a few hours or have a decent night or two of sleep, everything starts humming along normally enough again. I'm quite familiar with that sort of thing, having worked in the grocery industry for years and performing a lot of heavy manual labor. And in my other profession as a sedentary author, repetitive stress injuries like carpal tunnel and tennis elbow become unwelcome but regularly recurring guests. Life is its own form of inescapable wear and tear, am I right? But at some point in early 2022, something with me changed. It started with my feet. Again, sore feet after tromping around a grocery store is nothing new. Come home, rest the dogs, and be good to go the next day. But this time, all the telltale symptoms of plantar fasciitis started cropping up. I immediately started doing all the recommended treatments, rollers, stretches, compression socks, splints, foot soaks, really expensive shoes and inserts, but nothing really worked. And the agony started spreading upward over the next several weeks. Achilles tendons, check. Then the knees, then my left hip, then my mid-back and shoulders. Soon, every muscle, ligament, and joint in my body suddenly felt like it was rusting into place. The only thing that took the edge off was the roughly 1,200 milligrams of Advil I took every day before work, that I would live in terror of forgetting because I simply knew without it, I could not physically move through my day. If I got to work and realized I didn't have Advil, I would immediately call home and have my husband or one of my kids rush it over to me. It was that bad. And then from about February 2022 and onward, despite the Advil, work became a hellscape of blinding misery. Most times I'd still be limping from the exertions of the night before when I arrived for my next shift. 8 hours later, I would hobble to my car in tears, crying out as I bent down to get into my car. On the drive home, I'd revel in nearly orgasmic relief of being at rest. But as my trip home is only a few minutes long, I'd have to start psyching myself up almost immediately for the pain of getting back out of the car, onto my feet, and crossing the long gulf of my driveway and into the house, where my husband would have my foot bath ready and my requisite cocktail to truly take my mind away from the screaming happening all throughout my body. You might think I'm being hyperbolic here, but if anything, I'm actually frustrated by the lack of vocabulary to describe how bad this really was. The last time in 2022 I remember feeling anything approaching normal was when my husband Ken and I took a road trip to Las Vegas in April. It gave me some time off work and allowed my body to rest, but I encountered a lot of new physical limitations on that trip. Walking long distances was a challenge requiring elaborate footwear solutions. The worst moment, though, was when I discovered I didn't have the physical strength to walk up a mild rocky incline at a gorgeous lookout point in Utah where we wanted to get and take some pictures. And I just couldn't trust that my feet and legs would support me like they used to. The connection just wasn't there. And Ken had to hold my hand the whole way to help keep me steady. It was the first real moment where I was starting to feel like this condition, whatever it was more than just pain. It was actually starting to diminish me, something that I had never experienced before and was actually alarming. People who know me know that I'm not a small person, and I've always been relatively fit. I love a good hike. I've swam many a mile in many a lap pool, and I have a lot of cardio endurance. Only a couple of years ago, I was pulling 1-ton pallets of Mountain Dew 24 packs from one side of a Walmart to another, and then throwing each of those 24 packs onto a shelf without really breaking a sweat. But now I could barely walk. I was not well. The pain was actually starting to hurt. However, before giving in to all that, I figured I could at least try to drop some weight, start eating my low sugar diet again, Certainly that was contributing to my inflammation problems. Maybe I could take some magnesium supplements to drink more water, less alcohol. The answers to wellness were all there right in front of me. I've followed this advice countless times throughout my life when I felt out of sorts in my body, and it always worked. I got this. Easy peasy, right? The problem with that was in all my previous ventures with course correcting my way to feeling better physically, I wasn't working from a place of such deep disadvantage before, and I just couldn't hold it together. The pain was too great, and when you're desperate to do anything to quiet the volume of all your soft tissue screeching in unison, you're going to take the path of least resistance nearly every single time. You're going to eat whatever is easiest to get. You're going to drink things that take you just a little bit outside the hell raging inside you. Fuck counting macros. I just needed to subsist. And yet, somehow through all this, I was doing this show, Ding Dong Darkness Time. Other than working, eating, drinking, and spending every available second I had in bed, I was doing this show. I stopped writing books. In fact, I told myself I was probably done with the whole author thing, but I could work and do this show, and if I had that, everything would be okay. But I was having trouble dressing myself, and my house was a disaster. Over the previous spring and summer, my yard became a mess of weeds and dead vegetation. On my days off, I rarely got dressed. If I had a plan to do something that day, like hit up Costco, I knew that would be the only errand I had in me. Anything else would have to be pushed to another day. Then things started falling apart a little at work. I couldn't maintain the small leadership role I'd been promoted to in July because I needed to cut back my hours. And while other issues necessitated the need to do that, I also knew I didn't have the physical stamina to balance full-time work with everything else I was dealing with. In fact, I was thinking of seeing if I could whittle myself down to working 2 days a week. That way I could at least still make a little money and do this podcast. I kept cranking out shows. To use the parlance from my new favorite TV show, The Boys, this podcast became my canary. If I could release an episode of Ding Dong Darkness Time every week, then I was doing okay. It didn't matter that I was increasingly unable to do pretty much anything else. When I decided to take a hiatus from this show back in December, I was genuinely just looking to take a bit of a Christmas break and get things up and running by January. It was a tiny surrender after grinding for the last 8 months or so, and I thought I'd earned a little bit of rest. Except my mental health had taken a true nosedive by that point. I was anxious, irritated, and depressed. This is another thing about chronic pain that not enough people acknowledge: the damage it does to your brain. We're not designed to be in this pain state for so long. Soaked in continuous cortisol and other stress hormones, eventually the brain rewires itself, much like we talked about in our Cults Primer episode, where continuous receiving of bad information also forces the brain to rewire itself. In this case, your gray matter starts to diminish. In fact, studies have found that chronic pain patients tend to have at least 10% less gray matter than those without chronic pain, which is the equivalent of the brain aging 10 to 20 years. Additionally, problems with motor function, coordination, memory, emotional regulation, and attention span starts to occur. I can easily vouch for this, having become far clumsier in recent months. And of course, clumsiness leads to more injuries, which only leads to more pain. Anxiety and depression also become common. In fact, 85% of chronic pain sufferers have some sort of mood disorder as a comorbidity. In order to avoid a lot of these problems associated with pain, chronic sufferers end up recusing themselves from their social lives and other family and any situations that could cause their condition to flare worse. You start to fear the pain and therefore avoid all things that could lead to it. But I still had to go to work. In some ways, though it has been the most direct source of my physical discomfort, it at least forced me out there to interact with people, and putting up my front But it wasn't enough. Time off work no longer meant time out of pain, and the Advil stopped working altogether. I was spinning deeper and deeper into this rut, and I knew I needed some kind of intervention. It all came to a head in December when a coworker graciously lent me her shoulder to cry on during a long break when I wasn't sure I'd be able to continue my shift. I finally decided I was no longer strong enough to mitigate this on my own, and I made an appointment with my doctor. He put me on a treatment regimen of a prescription NSAID called meloxicam and another medication called Cymbalta, which can act as both an antidepressant and a treatment for pain. He also referred me to a rheumatologist who, after a full examination, diagnosed me with psoriatic arthritis. This was actually no surprise at all, as I have suffered from psoriasis since childhood. I take a different medication to keep that under control, and both it and the arthritis run in my family. But was that the only culprit? My genes simply activated by age? Well, not necessarily. The rheumatologist perked up at one particular entry in my chart, and that was my infection with COVID in January of 2022. The emergence of these symptoms almost immediately after is certainly not a coincidence. The doctor said it's become quite common to see these types of autoimmune flare-ups post-COVID. I should also add that I contracted COVID yet again in November of last year, right around the time I fell very deeply into an emotional black hole. Again, not a coincidence. The great news, though, is the treatment started working almost immediately. I'm able to get through an entire work shift with full energy and only mild pain now. My off days are completely pain-free. I'm able to do things for myself again. I'm becoming interested in tackling long-forgotten projects and beginning new ones. I no longer have to lie in bed bargaining with myself about how if I can get out of bed and breathe through the feeling of having hot pokers jabbed through my heels and up my legs, then I can enjoy the warm embrace of the living room couch for the rest of the day. Now I just get up, get dressed, and go about my day. I no longer feel crushing anxiety before going to work. So you're probably thinking, wow, that's awesome. So what gives? If you're feeling so great, why did I have to get into mid-February before another episode of Ding Dong Darkness Time? And I guess that's the thing. I've been feeling so great just existing. If this show was my canary through the dark, dangerous, chronic pain mines, then what do I do now that I'm no longer in that mine? Well, don't worry. As I said before, the show is back. And not only that, I'm going to see to it that 2023 is far bigger and better than 2022. At the end of February, I'm leaving my day job. Make no mistake, I loved working there. Truly, despite all the pain, I'm not sure I would have survived the last year without my amazing coworkers giving me a reason to smile every day and feel part of an amazing group. But in addition to needing to look after my own health and reduce my exposure to COVID by a factor of 100, I have other obligations calling me: family, books that need writing, podcasts that need airing, and a billion other projects begging for my attention. Psoriatic arthritis has no cure, but it already ate up an entire year of my life, and I have no plans to let it have another if I can avoid it. But in addition to paying mind to chronic pain, I want to mention something about invisible illness. A lot of the people who know me well are aware of what I've been dealing with, but supervisors at work and all the customers I served had no clue that I've been carrying this kind of burden, and their expectations of me were set accordingly. That I would be of good cheer and able body to do all the things my peers in the school of pain don't hurt can do. People are under a lot of expectations to perform well in their daily lives. And when we try to express how that might not be possible, there's often little accommodation to be had. Everyone has a cross to bear, after all, so we must shoulder ours and carry on. I'm not talking specifically about my circumstances here. I've been lucky overall. But this is still the case for millions of people who work in jobs that continue to erode them both physically and mentally with little to no time off, not to mention any other recourse. I have the privilege of being able to leave my job, but for those who can't, what will they do to feed themselves when their bodies are worn down to useless nubs, and even the government looks at them and says, no, our highly impersonal formula calculates that you can still work. And they're still 10 or 15 years away from retirement age and Social Security benefits that might not even be there when the time comes. And given the millions of people who've survived COVID with similar caveats as mine, or worse, we're possibly looking at a massive chunk of the workforce that will be permanently out of the game, and they'll be looking for help from a federal government who is still referencing job tables that are 50 years out of date, filled with professions that no longer exist to determine whether a person is truly disabled and can no longer work. Yes, that's actually a thing that is happening right now, and I'll be sure to link that in the show notes. Point being, there are about to be a lot more of us carrying around invisible illnesses, and I don't know how we intend to reckon with that. Anyway, that's both the long and short of why I've been out of the picture for a bit. There's a lot more that I can add about what I've been doing with my time and what I'll be doing in the future, but just know that the wheels here have been turning again. I recorded 3 episodes back in early January, and I have several more marked on the calendar to record this month and the next. If you've been dealing with something similar, I would really love to hear from you. If you're listening to this and feeling you can relate perhaps a bit too much, I hope you're getting the care you need. Just know that you are not alone. I could not have gotten through this last year of my life without some very important people. They know who they are, but I'm not sure they'll ever know the depth of my love and gratitude. And I am also extremely thankful to so many of the listeners who reached out to me directly when they noticed that there weren't any shows popping up on their regular feeds. It meant the world to me, and just know that I'm back and you helped get me here. Finally, there will be some changes to the show format soon. In my time off, I have decided to abandon the season format going forward. While I intend to finish out what I have planned for cults, I've decided to make things less restrictive after that so I can be more reactive to timely events or just things that have piqued my interest in the moment. So from here on, it's going to be the standard longer episodes of my topic of choice with short ding-dong ditches sprinkled throughout. I'm excited to have you along for the journey, and I hope you'll tell your friends about the show or leave a review over on Apple if you're so inclined. I have a fun bunch of episodes in store for you in the coming weeks, and I hope you're ready for them. In the meantime, you know what to do. Be good, you little ding-dongs.